homelands remains the most powerful articulation of the rights of peoples to decide their own political and national destinies. However, it was at the end of the Second World War that the world really saw the notion of self-determination come into its own as the European powers began withdrawing from their colonial empires in Africa and Asia. Explicitly outlined in the very first article of the Charter of the United Nations, the general acceptance of the right of self-determination led to a proliferation of new countries in the decades that followed. When the UN was founded in 1945, it had just 51 members. Today, membership stands at 193. The principle of self-determination is deceptively alluring. While the idea of statehood remains an aspiration for many peoples around the world, history has shown that achieving independence from another national entity, usually known in the parlance of international law as the parent state, is fiendishly difficult. Few are willing to part with territory. Whether due to cultural or historical attachment to the land in question, the economic costs of losing a province, or just plain national pride, the parent states meet any attempt by a region or minority to secede with fierce opposition. Indeed, these states are often prepared to use force to prevent a territory from breaking away. A string of bitter and bloody secessionist wars in Africa, South Asia, the Caucasus, and the Balkans over the past 50 years are testament to just how far parent states are willing to go to preserve their territorial integrity in the face of a separatist threat. Even if a territory manages to persuade the parent state from which it wants to secede to let it go its own way, the process of negotiating a separation can be arduous. A vast array of issues need to be tackled. These can range from the division of assets through to key decisions over its membership of international bodies. For example, it took a decade after Yugoslavia collapsed in the early 1990s for the 5 former republics to conclude an agreement on succession covering such issues as diplomatic properties, state archives, and pension payments. As well as stiff opposition from their parent states, territories vying for independence often face strong resistance from other states. The harsh reality is that an aspiring country rarely finds support from the wider international community. Members of that community are often extremely cautious about secession in general, and positively loathe cases where the decision to break away has taken place without the permission of the parent state. They usually punish unilateral secession by isolation and ostracization. This is hardly surprising. Only a dozen or so countries in the world are homogeneous. The vast majority are made up of 2 or more ethnic or national communities. The fear of separatist contagion is strong. What happens to one country today could happen to their own tomorrow. Any territory vying for independence needs to prove that it deserves to be accepted as an independent and sovereign state. The usually invoked benchmarks for acceptance are the so-called Montevideo criteria. Named after a treaty signed in 1933 in the city of Montevideo, Uruguay, and signed by countries in the Americas, the criteria require a prospective state to show that it has a defined territory, a permanent population, a truly independent government in effective control of its territory and population, and the ability to enter relations with other states. While these criteria are still invoked as the bar for international acceptance, in the decades that followed the treaty, other factors started to gain prominence. For instance, a greater emphasis is now put on such issues as human rights norms and democratic values. Even if a territory proves that it meets the conditions of statehood, the next challenge is to be formally admitted into the select club of recognized countries. This happens in 2 ways. First of all, there is recognition by other countries. Although legal theorists have long argued that recognition is not necessary, it provides a gateway into the international community. It is the way that states signal they accept the legitimacy of a territory as an equal, at least in formal terms. Recognition is the precursor to the establishment of formal diplomatic relations, which allows for independent states to communicate directly with one another and to enter into bilateral